y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is going to be a Heel Heat Top 10. The topic of this Top 10? Top 10 Bret the Hitman Hart matches. And he's one of those wrestlers that everybody thinks of when you think of great wrestling. So here's my list of what I think the 10 best Bret Hart matches are. And I believe you can find all of these, if not most of these, on the WWE Network if you haven't seen them. I'm not going to say the results if there's matches on here you haven't seen, but I will give where you can find it. That way you can go back and look for it. And explain why I consider it historically significant. Or one of its better matches. Number 10. This is probably one of the 4 or 5 best matches in Monday Night Raw, and I believe it was less than a year into the airing of Monday Night Raw. If not, it was within the first 2 years, and that's Bret Hart versus the 1-2-3 Kid, future known as X-Pac and Six and Shawn Waltman, from Raw on July 1st, 1994. This was a fantastic match. Here you had a guy in Bret Hart who just recently kind of was made the face of the company, or was still in the build process to do that, and the 1-2-3 Kid, who was relatively new to the company as well. And you basically got the building of two of the bigger stars of the new generation era. I'm just butchering all kinds of stuff in this. But anyway, a really good match. Like I said, probably still almost 25 years later, one of the top 5 matches in Monday Night Raw history, in my opinion. Just a great match, a great example of what we could have on Monday Night Raw. And that's not to say that Monday Night Raw has bad matches all the time. Just when done right, you get Bret Hart versus the 1-2-3 Kid. Next up, our number 9 match, and it was our first real match, in my opinion, that cemented Bret Hart as going to be a singles competitor or a singles star, and that's Bret the Hitman Hart versus Roddy Piper for the Intercontinental title at Wrestlemania 8. They had done some things where they separated him from the Hart Foundation, and he had done some solo work. But I believe here, at this moment, it really cemented that Bret Hart was going to be a guy that going forward would be a huge face of the company, a guy that they can bank on, put their money in. And you started to see where he was going to go. Roddy Piper, absolutely, you could tell he was totally 100% into this match and helping Bret Hart get to that next level. It's just a fantastic match. It's a face versus face match, which are rare, as we know, but I just thoroughly enjoyed this. I thought this is probably the best match on the WrestleMania 8 card. I really liked it, and I thought it was really one of the jumping off points on Bret Hart's career. Now, our number 8 match. This, to me, is one of the greatest Intercontinental title matches in history, and that's Bret the Hitman Hart versus Mr. Perfect from Summerslam 1991. Again, like I said, we have 2 guys that were really starting to hit their stride. Bret Hart would go on to be Bret Hart, one of the great wrestlers of all time, but Mr. Perfect is one of the most underrated wrestlers of all time, and one of the guys who really doesn't get his due and his respect. A lot of wrestlers will say he's one of the best wrestlers of all time, but you don't hear too many of the fans echoing that sentiment, and it's really a shame, because when you look back at his career, I mean, the guy was amazing. He was great in the AWA when he was just a young kid. He was, as Mr. Perfect, he was awesome. He played a great part when he turned on the 4 Horsemen to join the NWO, to set that storyline and make it go even further. A guy that I believe is criminally underrated, and I think it's kind of a shame that he is, but he was such a great performer, and him and Bret, like I said, put on one of the great Intercontinental matches of all time at this point. Now our number 7. This match, it was the spectacle and everything built around it. I'm talking about Bret the Hitman Hart versus the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith at SummerSlam 92. And it was an Intercontinental title match that went on as the main event. And the fact that who they were at the time and their history, knowing that their brother-in-law and brother, however you would say that, knowing that they had ties back to when the Hart Foundation and the British Bulldogs wrestled. And these guys, again, another thing where you have the two guys in the match were really starting to break out and really getting that stride, and really, you could see where these were going to be two of the guys that were going to be main eventers for the next decade, and two of the guys that really got that trajectory going. Probably the British Bulldogs' greatest match of all time. At least solo, because some of his work with the Bulldogs was, wow, that was just... Him and Dynamite were amazing together. I love that team. But again, this match, I really enjoyed it. I really feel like it was 2 stars really taking that proverbial brass ring and going with it. Now, our number 6 is probably the feud that we most remember of Owen Hart's. And this was one of the very early matches in it, Bret the Hitman Hart versus Owen Hart from WrestleMania 10. This match is, I'm going to put it out there, this is still one of the top 5-10 WrestleMania matches of all time. I absolutely love the match. I love the way that Bret and Owen worked together. I love the fact that Owen kind of took the opportunity, like I said with most of these, and kind of cemented himself as being a star here. Without hyperbole, I would say this is probably the best opening match in WrestleMania history. It's just such a great match, and again, it's one of those ones, I know there's a lot of people that rank it really high, and I know there's a lot of people that gush over it like I am right now, but it's one of those ones that kind of doesn't get mentioned when we talk about the great WrestleMania matches. We talk about the Shawn Michaels and Undertaker, and we talk about other matches like Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior, but we don't mention this one as much, and it's probably because there wasn't as much online. There wasn't such a high risk, high reward element to it. But I just think it's a great match. I really do. I think it's a really good thing, and I love the brother versus brother. The younger brother feeling like he was disrespected by the older, more successful brother. Kind of a little bit of jealousy going into it. I thought the whole thing, the story was amazing. The whole thing, to me, was amazing. Now, our number 5 match. Again, you're going to see a theme on a lot of these. This one was Bret the Hitman Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin from Survivor Series 1996. And much like I said, like with a couple of these, this is kind of one that gets lost in the mix that people don't really talk about much. But to me, this was a point where Steve Austin was really starting to hit his stride. He was really getting into the Stone Cold character, really catching fire. We're still almost a year and a half out before he becomes world champion. But here we see that he's at that level, that he could perform on the level with the big guys, with the Bret Harts, with the Shawn Michaelses of the time, with the Undertakers. And again, like I said with a lot of these, this is just a highly underrated match, and it was really when we seen, because I'd been a Stone Cold Steve Austin fan, but to be perfectly honest with you, I liked his character more as Stunning Steve Austin. Just me. I know I'll probably get crucified for saying that. But when I look at his run as Stone Cold Steve Austin, he took that and went to a different level. Stunning Steve Austin could have been a guy that went to a higher level, but never really got that opportunity. When he turned himself and he became more of who the real person Steve Williams is, and amped that up to 11, as he likes to say, he really took off and really connected, and I felt this was one of the matches that it really was the clicking point where the fans were getting behind him. He had proven that he could do it in the ring, and we could see that he was going to be one of the guys. And even here, who knew how huge he was going to be, that he would be the biggest star in the history of wrestling. But you started to see that here, and you started to really believe he could be that guy. And this was the match that set that off, in my opinion. Now, our number 4. This is the first time on our list that we have a second match with a person on the list. And this is from SummerSlam 1994, Bret the Hitman Hart versus Owen Hart in the steel cage match. I love this match. I love the big blue cage. I know there's people that like it, people that don't like it. I thought it looked special and different. For vision-wise and what it comes off on TV or video, it's not the greatest look, and it's probably, I understand that the cage where they use the fencing is a little bit more forgiving and more, helps the wrestlers go along. But there was something to be said about how different it looked. Like every other promotion, AWA, WCW, NWA, ECW, World Class, wherever it may be, they always had a steel cage that was the fence cage. So WWE having the solid steel blue cage, and which eventually they painted black and then eventually went to the traditional style of cage, it was different and it looked different and it made the matches feel different and they had different rules. And this was another point. I love this match so much. I'm a huge Owen Hart fan, and to me, the highlights of Owen's career are his matches with Bret and his feud with Bret, and eventually teaming with Bret. But the whole story and knowing what we know from the beginning to the end, it even makes us feel more special. And as you can see, you want to say there's certain people that are tied to a certain show. SummerSlam seemed to be the show that Bret the Hitman Hart thrived on. A lot of really great matches he had on SummerSlam, even ones that did not make this list. He was it felt like he made that show his show. Like Undertaker has WrestleMania, or Shawn Michaels has WrestleMania maybe. And certain people like John Cena has a track record of really good matches at Survivor Series, and so on and so forth. Bret Hart in SummerSlam, to me, he's the guy that performed at the highest level and put on the best matches when you put a body of work together at the show and at that specific pay-per-view, in my opinion. Now, our number 3 match kind of plays off of the last match. This is Bret the Hitman Hart versus the Crippler Chris Benoit from October 4th, 1999, Monday Nitro. Now, if you're going to look for this on the network, as you probably already know, they don't flag Benoit matches, so you're probably going to have to do a little bit of searching. There's not going to be those little dots to jump to it. I'm going to say to look for the big area where there's no dot, because I want to say this was at least a 30-40 minute match. It may have been longer. I'm going by recollection. I haven't seen the match in over 5 years at least, and it maybe even more than that. But this, to me, is by far the best match on Monday Nitro history. And we see it here. We've talked about it on a lot of this. He's got one of the best he's got probably the best matches in SummerSlam history. one of the best matches in Monday Night Raw history, some of the great matches in WrestleMania history. And he really, this to me, out of everything of Bret Hart's WCW run, which, let's be honest, it was very underwhelming, this was the shining example of what could have been done when it was done right. You got a younger guy in Chris Benoit who would go on to be bigger things, and yeah, I know. For purposes of this videos, we're going to keep it to Chris Benoit's career, not what happened. And I know it's controversial. A lot of people don't even want to see him on these lists, but he really was a special talent, and he had the ties back to the Hart family dungeon. He was friends with Owen Hart. They had teamed at some point some points earlier in their career. He had ties to Bret. So the emotion, and this was in the same arena that Owen passed away in. So the whole emotion of it and the match they put on as a tribute to their brother and friend, it was just fantastic. I thought this was truly great. I never understood why WCW didn't do more with Chris Benoit, but we know that's why the Radicals happened. So, half a dozen of one, 6 of the other, I guess. Now, with that being said, moving on to our next one, which is someone who's controversial, but not as controversial, surprisingly. I'm sure he, at some point, was 10 times more, but, of course, you know. I haven't mentioned many WrestleMania matches, and we're really going to get into one right here. From WrestleMania 12, Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid, versus Bret the Hitman Hart in the Iron Man match. This is the Iron Man match that set the bar for Iron Man matches. It's the one that when we look at it today, when we see Kenny Omega versus Kazuchika Okada, or Seth Rollins versus Dolph Ziggler, this is the bar they have to meet. They have to go to see, they have to be able to do what Michaels and Bret Hart did. And this match was pure spectacle. It was one of the, probably going to be the last time you see a match of that length and magnitude at WrestleMania. I know we've had some longer ones, 30, 40, 45-minute matches. But I don't think they're ever going to dedicate a whole hour of a show to any one guy now, or two guys now. But they might. They may. I might be wrong. The endurance it took, the skill level, the high level that both of these guys were on. Two of the greats in wrestling. Shawn Michaels absolutely... Actually, I believe this was a little before his prime, but still close enough to his prime that he was as good as he ever was. Bret the Hitman Hart, I believe this actually was in his prime. So we're getting two of the guys that are easily two of the top 10 wrestlers in the ring, and they're putting on a clinic for a whole hour. I'm not going to spoil it if you haven't seen it, which I can't believe if you're watching this video you haven't seen this match, but if you haven't, go watch it. Like I said, I don't want to spoil any of the results because I know there's probably a couple matches, even if you're if you're a newer Bret Hart fan, or maybe you were a casual Bret Hart fan, that you may not have seen. So I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to say too much about it, but go watch it. Your hour investment will definitely be worth it. Now, before we get into our number one, we have a little thing we do here called the best of the rest. Basically, these are matches that didn't quite make the top 10, but they were into consideration when I put together the list. First match, another repeat offender, Bret the Hitman Hart versus Mr. Perfect from the 1993 King of the Ring semifinals. To me, if this would have been the King of the Ring final, it might have ranked higher. I really like this match. I like this match a lot. And I went back and forth between this and their SummerSlam match on which would be on the top 10. And it wasn't necessarily, I would have maybe put both of them, but they were both kind of in that fringe in the bottom half of the top 10, maybe outside of this. But this is another fantastic match, another one that doesn't get talked about a lot, but it's really good, really high skilled, two amazing wrestlers, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. This is one I believe you should go back and check out. Again, if you haven't seen this match already, it's probably not one of the most well talked about Bret Hart matches or Mr. Perfect matches, but it's kind of a hidden gem, and it's kind of one that people that remember watching the show really liked, and it's always stuck with me through all these years, 25 years later as I'm shooting this, how good this match really was. Next up on our Best of the Rest, Bret the Hitman Hart versus Terry Funk from Terry Funk's WrestleFest. This was the 1997 retirement of Terry Funk, which I believe was the 26th or 27th at the time, or who knows. Terry Funk retires more times than most people have wrestling matches. You can find this, it's under the Hidden Gems in the WWE Network. I have the RF Video DVD, I had the RF Video VHS when it was new. This was a weird, and not to say the match was weird, the match was fantastic. Terry Funk does not get the credit he deserves for the wrestler that he is. Most people think of him as just the hardcore guy, but really Terry Funk is one of the finest wrestlers there's ever been in the ring. And probably, I always say to people, if you ask me who the top wrestler of all time is, it's Ric Flair, but it could be Terry Funk as well. And they both kind of hold that spot for me. Ric Flair gets it, in my opinion, because of the high level he had to perform at, whereas Terry Funk, got to, take times where he wasn't the top guy. But I digress. That's another topic for another story. We're not talking about either of these guys. We're talking about Bret, and this match was fantastic. Terry Funk actually promoted the card. If you watch Behind the Mat or Beyond the Mat, I believe, I forget what the name is. I think it's Beyond the Mat. You see him putting this card together, and it was a weird dichotomy because ECW lent him guys, there were some indie guys, some legends that he booked, and also some guys from the WWE that came in to wrestle the show out of respect for Terry Funk and everything he did for the business. Just a great match, a match that I know a lot of people didn't see, and I highly recommend. It's the reason I put it on here. I love this match a lot. I'm a huge Terry Funk fan, and like I said, just these two together was fantastic. Now, last but not least, for the Best of the Rest, Bret the Hitman Hart versus Hakushi, also known as Sation Saki, from the FMW promotion. This was Hakushi, came over. He did not have a long run in WWF at the time. This was from the first In Your House, and probably the best match out of all the In Your House matches. I don't think you get much better than this. I really think they could have done more with Hakushi or Shinzaki, however you know him. I know him more as Jinsei Shinzaki, so that's why I say this. I watched a lot of FMW back in the 90s and early 2000s. Hakushi had there was such a presence about him, kind of like what you get when you see a Shinsuke Nakamura, where he transcended being a Japanese wrestler. He could have been so much more. Unfortunately, he didn't have a great run, and at the time, the track record with foreign talent in WWE wasn't great, so he did have a great run in FMW. Definitely look up Jinsei Shinzaki. You will not be disappointed. He's a fantastic wrestler. I really thoroughly enjoyed this match. like I said, it's kind of one of those things where you go back and you watch it and you love it, but you wish they could have kept him around. Imagine the matches that Jinsei could have had, or Hakushi at the time, could have had with guys like Owen Hart and Steve Austin and The Rock later on, and guys like Ken Shamrock. And people forget how good Ken Shamrock was, but I think this would have been a perfect opponent for a guy like Ken Shamrock or Dan Severn, a guy with more of that hard-hitting style. And then when they started bringing in the hardcore stuff, he could have been a guy that fit right into this. Again, I don't know what the issue was. I don't know why he didn't have a long career. I just wish he would have been an American, been in WWF for a longer period of time. But basically, that's my best of the rest. And we're going to roll right into it to our number one. The number one match, and if you're a fan of wrestling, it's probably a glaring omission, so you can probably guess what it is. From Wrestlemania 13, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Bret the Hitman Hart in the I Quit match. And the aforementioned Ken Shamrock was the referee. Funny how that tied in. That wasn't on purpose, I just did. But anyway, I digress. This match is probably the greatest story that has been told inside of a wrestling match that I could think of. Yeah, two guys came into the match, and I know I said I wasn't going to spoil, but I know everybody knows this. I'm not going to give away the results, I guess, so there's still that if you haven't seen it. But you came into the match as Bret Hart was a face, the hero of the company, and Steve Austin was a heel. Bret was starting to get booed. Steve was starting to get cheered. You have them wrestling. During the course of the match, it subtly changed. And now, coming out of the match, we have, for the first time since the Hart Foundation tag team, Bret the Hitman Hart is a heel. And Stone Cold Steve Austin is a face. And his rocket ship is flying to be the biggest face in the history of wrestling. I really love this match. I love the story it told. It is the perfect double turn. No one has been able to recreate it in the 20 plus years since. No one did it in the 70, 80, 100 years of wrestling before this. To me, this is storytelling at its finest. This is a double turn at its finest. It's two fantastic wrestlers, two of the guys that you think of when you think of that Attitude Era and New Generation Era. These two guys stand out, and just a great match in my opinion. It's one, if I'm to meet new wrestling fans, it's one of them I tell to go check out. It's one that I recommend to my friends that don't know the history of wrestling or don't know certain things. So, to me, just a perfect match, in my opinion. With all that being said, if you think I've left a match off the list, if you think I put a match up too high, one too low, let me know what you think. Leave it down there in the comments. Make sure you hit like and share. And also, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and ding that bell so you get notifications every time I make a video or a video gets published. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat Top 10.